This husky wasn't thirsty at all, refused to share the only water source. Whenever another dog tried to take a sip, the husky would fiercely chase it away. Since the husky was the pack leader, the other dogs could only bow their heads in silence. But the newcomer, the big Buck, wouldn't recognize this leader. Buck stepped over the husky and gently dug out a new water source with his paws. Seeing this, all the thirsty dogs gathered around Buck. Kind-hearted Buck was more than happy to share. With everyone witnessing this, the husky grew furious. He felt Buck was challenging his status. That night, the husky escalated his behavior by snatching away a companion's dinner. Just as the golden retriever felt utterly helpless, appeared once more. He placed the only food before the golden retriever, fearing the golden might hesitate, nudged the food closer, signaling it was safe to eat. After this, Buck walked away without looking back, leaving only a pack of dogs who now looked up to him. Yet the alpha husky despised Buck, believing himself the undisputed leader after the owner. But he failed to understand that for sled dogs, unity is paramount. That day, the mistress was scouting ahead on the frozen lake. Suddenly, the ice beneath her feet cracked. In the next instant, she fell into the lake. At a critical moment, Buck appeared. Without hesitation, he plunged into the icy water, swimming swiftly to her side. The clever Buck used his body to shield her, swimming while searching for a breakable patch of ice. In the final moment of crisis, Buck faintly saw the Wolf King guiding him. Trusting his instincts, Buck charged toward the Wolf King. Using his last ounce of strength, he successfully broke through the ice. The woman was saved. Buck, exhausted, was swept back under. Seeing Buck being carried away, the man grew frantic. He shouted desperately from the ice, trying to locate Buck. Soon he found traces of Buck. But no matter how hard he tried, it was futile. Just as the man despaired, Buck miraculously reappeared before him.
Buck!
Later, to express her gratitude, the woman gave Buck her only chicken leg. The husky, witnessing this, grew intensely jealous. It resolved to teach Buck a lesson someday. Late at night, a playful Buck spotted an adorable little rabbit. Excited, like a child, Buck chased after it, playing endlessly. Soon, the agile Buck caught the little rabbit, didn't harm it. He gently set it down, then nudged the rabbit softly, signaling it could go home. Just then, the husky suddenly appeared and snatched the rabbit. Buck couldn't understand why the husky did this, but the husky had no intention of explaining. Approached Buck menacingly. A fierce battle seemed inevitable. Buck didn't want to fight his own kind. The husky, however, cared little for that. In the next instant, he ambushed Buck. Buck's bulky frame and lack of fighting experience meant he was no match for the husky at first. Seizing the moment, the husky leaped and bit Buck, throwing him wildly back and forth until he was finally knocked unconscious. The victorious husky looked down, contemptuously at the pack supporting Buck. Not a single dog dared challenge the husky anymore. Though they weren't convinced, the dogs kept trying to rouse Buck. Just as the husky was about to discipline the pack, Buck suddenly woke up with a vicious glare. Seeing this, the husky grew furious. The next second, the husky charged at Buck again. This time, Buck seized the husky. In one swift bite, he hoisted the husky high and slammed it down. With a vicious thud, the defiant husky still bared its teeth, but its gaze instantly softened upon seeing Buck. Who would have thought? The seemingly gentle Buck now resembled a wolf king. The husky finally conceded defeat. It rose slowly to its feet and then walked away from the pack, looking utterly dejected. The next day, a confident Buck volunteered to be the lead dog. But how could the owner trust this scatterbrained dog? So the owner assigned the experienced lead dog Gray. Gray stubbornly refused. For some reason, he was terrified of Buck. With no other choice, the master determined to deliver the mail on time. Had to let Buck try. The command leaped to his feet. Under his lead, the dogs pulled together as one, racing faster than a snowmobile. This unprecedented speed thrilled the master, who was always running late. He shouted joyfully at the foot of the mountain. This triggered an avalanche. As disaster loomed, the owner immediately ordered the dogs to turn left and flee. But then the lead dog Buck disobeyed and veered in the opposite direction. This left the owner utterly stunned. Before the owner could stop him, Buck executed a sharp drift, leading the pack into a mountain cave. The terrified owner tried to slam on the brakes behind them. Buck, as lead dog, showed no intention of stopping. Death still pursued them. The pack raced through the cave at breakneck speed. Soon a faint glimmer of light appeared ahead. Buck decisively accelerated, bursting out of the cave with a mighty surge. Buck had successfully snatched everyone back from the jaws of death. The owner, having just narrowly escaped death, ordered Buck to stop. Buck dared not relax. He continued racing forward with the owner in tow. Left with no choice, the owner could only trust Buck. Accelerated relentlessly, finally arriving at their destination on time. But before anyone could celebrate, the next crisis came. Though the ending wasn't perfect, it marked the first time the owner delivered mail on schedule. From that day on, the sled dogs and the mailman became famous overnight. They became humanity's sole hope for communication with the outside world. Until one day, the mailman suddenly received a letter. Times changing. Mail had been replaced by telegraph. To make ends meet, the mailman had no choice but to sell the dogs. Though it broke his heart, he had to find new work to survive. Just as the dogs were grieving and helpless, a merchant appeared. He paid a hefty sum to buy the entire pack of sled dogs and prepared to take them on a new journey. But shortly after setting out, the snow began to melt. This made it impossible for the sled dogs to pull the sled. Unlike their former owner, the merchant lacked patience. He believed the lead dog Buck was deliberately slacking off. Just as he was about to punish Buck, an old man appeared in time to stop him, angrily rebuking the man.
You fool! The dog is trying to help you keep your life!
In the end, the old man saved Buck. Late at night, Buck finally woke up. He saw the old man drinking alone, while looking at a photo of a little boy. The clever Buck knew drinking was bad for the body, so he deliberately knocked the glass to the floor. Watching the old man go to pick up the glass, Buck seized the chance to snatch the bottle away, and buried it deep in the snow before plopping down on top of it. The old man, desperate for a drink, pushed and pushed but couldn't budge Buck an inch. With no other choice, the old man gave up. Heartbroken, he confided in Buck. Today was the anniversary of his son's death. An accident had taken his son's life, and he had come here to fulfill his son's dying wish. The next day, the old man decided to explore the secret place. His son had spoken of. Unable to let him go, followed in a small boat. Man and dog traversed a river teeming with fish. Birds in the sky welcomed them. At night, the moon guided their way. For 2.5 years of rowing, the pair finally reached the edge of the world. This earthly paradise had never been touched by human feet.
Fairy tale's true.
Such a large gold nugget had been discarded. Then the dog dove underwater and found a small piece of gold. Excitedly, the dog handed the gold to its owner. Just as the dog waited for praise, suddenly a white, unidentified creature flashed by in the distance. The owner noticed the dog's unusual expression and asked what it was looking at. Soon the owner seemed to understand something. He encouraged the dog to go investigate, but reminded it to return home before dark. With the owner's permission, the dog excitedly set off to track the unidentified creature. Soon the dog followed it into a primeval forest. Suddenly, a massive creature blocked the dog's path. The dog was confused, for it had never seen a bear before. The dog tried to approach the bear. The bear suddenly roared fiercely. Facing the ferocious bear, the dog fled in terror. As the dog raced deeper into the forest, the mysterious creature spotted it. Slowly approaching, the dog realized it was a white wolf, staring at the stunningly beautiful female wolf. The dog froze in nervous stillness. After a few seconds of mutual gaze, the dog bravely extended its paw in friendship. But the white wolf, unaware of the dog's intent, grew frightened and fled. Watching the white wolf's disappearing silhouette, the puppy hung its head in melancholy. Thus, the white wolf became the puppy's secret crush. After returning home, the puppy fell ill with lovesickness. The next morning, the puppy secretly observed the white wolf from afar. At that moment, the wolf pack was hunting. Their prey was a massive wild boar. Just as the alpha wolf was about to launch its attack, suddenly the alpha wolf slipped and fell into the water. He was swept away by the swift current. As he was about to plunge into the deep pool, the pack stood helplessly by. Just then, the stray dog leaped into action. Using its powerful frame, it managed to hoist a log weighing hundreds of pounds. The wolves watching nearby were stunned. This seemingly impossible feat was accomplished by a mere wild dog. With the dog's final burst of strength, the Wolf King was finally rescued. This act earned the wild dog the white wolf's profound respect. From that day on, the white wolf often sought out the wild dog to play. The old man secretly followed the dog, to his utter shock. The dog was mingling with a pack of wild wolves. Yet upon witnessing this, the old man felt no anger. Instead, he was filled with relief. He knew the dog had found its true home. But where was the home for this lonely, widowed old man? After pondering all night, the old man ultimately decided to return to the human world. Perhaps he could rediscover the feeling of home. Learning of the old man's departure, the dog felt profound reluctance. But the old man knew all partings must come. How much more so between a human and a pet? Yet on the very eve of his departure, a vicious man came knocking at the door. It turned out he had discovered the secret of the old man's gold. The two men grappled fiercely, but the aged old man was no match for him. To make this despicable creature leave, he handed over all his hoarded gold. Yet this paltry sum proved utterly insufficient to satisfy the man. Determined to protect the secret of his fortune, the man resolved to silence the old man forever. At the critical moment, the dog appeared just in time. Without hesitation, it tore the weapon from the man's grasp. Then glaring fiercely at its opponent, It vowed to avenge its master, but then the man produced a dog training stick. This instantly rekindled the dog's memories of past torment.
Good. You see it, boy?
In that instant, the dog seized the stick in its jaws, its primal instincts now fully awakened. The dog faced its fear head-on and charged forward. It rammed the man into the raging flames. As the wooden hut collapsed, the man vanished from sight. Coming to its senses, the dog rushed over to check on the old man's injuries, but the old man was already beyond saving. With his last breath, the old man urged the dog, "Live well for me,